I let them serve me last for 12 years. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every Sunday dinner where Diane stacked plates and handed them down the table like she was distributing worth, and mine always arrived last, slightly cooler than everyone else's. I never said a word. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I had survived worse. I had. But that Thursday in November, my phone buzzed in my cardigan pocket, and the voice that came through the speaker wasn't a coworker, wasn't a client, wasn't anyone I could explain away quietly. It was the governor and Earl Hutchins. Sitting 3 seats down, went very still. I watched 12 years of their assumptions rearrange themselves in about 4 seconds. Before I tell you how we got there, drop your country and your local time in the comments. I want to know who's listening tonight. A few hours earlier, I was sitting in my car at the end of the Cole family driveway, engine still running, watching dead leaves skitter across the brick walkway. I do that sometimes. Sit in parking lots, driveways, the shoulders of roads. Not because I'm afraid, because I've learned that the 2 minutes before you walk into a hard room are the last 2 minutes that belong entirely to you. After that, you're reacting. Before that, you can still choose who you're going to be. At 48, I've had a lot of practice choosing. Derek had gone ahead in his truck. He always arrived early to help his father with the folding tables. That was fine. Derek and I had been married 11 years, and I had learned the rhythms of his family the way you learn the layout of a building you have to navigate in the dark. You don't fight the walls. You just know where they are. The Cole house was a big colonial on 3 acres outside of town. Martin Cole had built the landscaping business from 2 trucks and a loan in 1978. By the time Derek was born, there were 40 trucks. By the time I married Derek, there were 200 and a regional headquarters. Martin Cole was the kind of man who equated net worth with personal worth so seamlessly that he had stopped noticing he was doing it. He wasn't cruel about it. He just sorted people that way, the way some people sort by height or age without thinking. It was the water he swam in. Deanne was his oldest. She had the business head he'd always wanted in a son, and she ran the landscaping company's operations division with the kind of efficiency that would have made a good executive officer. I had thought that, actually, the first time I watched her reorganize a catering delivery at Derek's cousin's wedding. She would have been good at it. She chose differently, and that was fine. But Diane had also inherited her father's sorting mechanisms, and somewhere in the first year of my marriage she had filed me under a category she never quite updated. Government worker, salary job, no equity, no ownership, no upside. Stable, maybe, but not serious. The first time she said it out loud, we were at Easter, 4 years into my marriage. Someone asked what I did, and Diane answered before I could. "Oh, Mindy works for the state, legal stuff." Then she turned back to her conversation. I watched it happen and decided it wasn't worth correcting, not because I was embarrassed, because explaining my actual job at a holiday dinner felt like pulling out a credential at a backyard barbecue. Nobody should have to do that. If they wanted to know, they could ask. Nobody asked. Over the years, the assumption calcified into fact. Mindy works for the state. Mindy has a government pension. Mindy probably gets federal holidays off. Said with the faint condescension of people who believe that anyone choosing a salary over equities simply lack the courage or the intelligence to do otherwise. I let it sit. I had made peace with being underestimated a long time before I married into this family. That peace had a history they didn't know about. In 2004, I was a captain in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, deployed to a forward operating base outside of Fallujah. I was 30 years old, and I had already seen things that rearranged the furniture of my understanding about what human beings do to each other. My job was military law, advising commanders on rules of engagement, investigating incidents, making sure that the chaos of combat didn't become the chaos of injustice. It sounds clean when you say it that way. It was not clean. There was a night in October of that year. I'm not going to describe it in full, not here, not yet, but a decision got made above my head that I had formally advised against. I put my objection in writing. It was filed, and then it was quietly buried. And 3 men did not come home because of what happened next. I spent 8 years knowing what I knew and carrying it in a place where it pressed against everything. In 2012, a congressional subcommittee reopened the investigation. My written objection resurfaced. The original ruling was vacated. The 3 men were posthumously cleared. I was not publicly credited. I didn't ask to be. What mattered was that the record was corrected. That experience taught me something that I have tried to live by ever since. Your title doesn't make you right. Your record does. Show up. Do the work. Let the work speak when the time comes. Until then, you don't owe anyone your resume. So when Diane Cole told people I worked for the state, I let her. I got out of the car at 11:47 on a Thursday morning, cardigan buttoned against the November cold, a sweet potato casserole in a ceramic dish, and my government-issued cell phone in my pocket. I had almost left the phone in the car. There was a briefing cycle running. The governor had mobilized 2 National Guard units for flood relief in the western counties 3 weeks earlier, and the legal closeout on the deployment authorization was still in process. My office had flagged a potential issue with the indemnification language the night before. I was the senior JAG advisor on the deployment. If something broke, they would call me. I decided to keep the phone. I told myself it probably wouldn't ring. Patricia Cole opened the front door before I reached the porch. She was 71 years old, and she had the posture of a woman who had spent decades absorbing the weather of other people's moods. She smiled at me with the particular warmth she reserved for moments when she felt guilty about something she hadn't stopped. "Mindy, honey, you didn't have to bring anything. I wanted to," I said. She took the casserole with both hands and held the door. Inside, the house smelled like turkey and wood smoke, and the cinnamon candles Patricia put out every November. 18 people over the course of the afternoon. Folding tables extended into the dining room. Derek was in the kitchen doorway talking to his brother-in-law, and he caught my eye and gave me a look that meant he was already tired. I understood Diane was at the kitchen island, directing traffic. She looked up when I came in, assessed my cardigan, and returned to her clipboard. "Mindy," she said. "Not unkindly. Just efficiently, Diane," I said. Earl Hutchins was in the living room with Martin, talking about something with his hands. Earl was 72, broad-shouldered even now, the kind of man who fills a room not by being loud but by being present. He had been coming to Cole Thanksgiving for as long as Derek could remember. Vietnam veteran, 2 tours, the kind of quiet that takes decades to earn. He looked up when I passed and nodded. I nodded back. I found a spot near the window and set down my purse and thought, 2 minutes. You had your 2 minutes in the car. Now you're here. Be here. The phone in my pocket was silent for now. The thing about Diane Cole is that she was never overtly mean. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't lived it. There was no single moment you could point to and say, "There, that's the one." That's when she crossed the line. It was more like water damage. Slow, patient, invisible until the wall starts to bow. A comment here. A redirection there. A laugh that lasted half a second too long before she changed the subject. Over 11 years of holidays, I had cataloged them the way a careful person catalogs small injuries. Not obsessively, but accurately. This Thanksgiving began the way they all began. Diane had the kitchen organized like a field operation. There were labeled dishes on the counter, a printed schedule of oven times on the refrigerator, and a seating chart, an actual laminated seating chart, propped against the fruit bowl. I had been placed at the far end of the extended table next to Derek's cousin's teenage son, who would spend the meal with earbuds in one ear and a phone in his hand. It was not an accident. The far end of the table was where Diane put people she considered peripheral. The teenagers. The plus ones. Me. Derek was seated in the middle, next to his father, where the real conversation happened. I didn't say anything. I found my place card, Mindy and Diane's precise handwriting, and I set my cardigan on the back of the chair and went to see if Patricia needed help with anything. She did. Patricia always needed help and never asked for it directly, which meant you had to learn to read her the way you read weather, not by what she said, but by how she was moving. She was moving fast and slightly hunched near the stove, which meant something had gone wrong with timing. "The rolls," she said when I appeared beside her. I forgot the rolls were still frozen. "How long do we have?" "Martin wants to sit down at 1. I checked the clock. 40 minutes. I found the rolls, found the right pan, found the temperature setting, and had them in the oven in under 3 minutes. Patricia exhaled. "You're a lifesaver," she said. Deanne from the island did not look up. "Mom, I had a backup roll plan." "I know you did, honey. I went back to being invisible." The guests filtered in over the next hour. Derek's brother Todd arrived with his wife and 2 kids, loud and cheerful, immediately gravitating toward the football game Martin had running in the living room. Derek's cousin Ellen came with her husband and the teenage boy who would be my dinner companion. An aunt and uncle from 2 hours north. Earl and his wife, Beverly, who walked with a cane now and had the same quality of quiet as her husband. Not absence, but depth. Earl shook hands with Martin in the living room and then turned and spotted me near the kitchen doorway. He paused. "I know you from somewhere," he said. Not a question exactly. "More like thinking out loud, Mindy Cole," I said. "Derek's wife." He studied my face for a moment with the patient attention of a man who trusted his memory even when it was slow. "You've been to a VFW event? Last spring, maybe." "I have," I said. "Fort Gordon area chapter." He nodded slowly. "Filed it, Earl Hutchins." "I know," I said. "Derek's talked about you for years." Beverly touched his arm and they moved on toward the living room, and I thought nothing more of it. The meal came together the way large family meals do, chaotically. Then suddenly, all at once, dishes appeared on the table. Martin said grace, long and formal, the way he did every year. People found their seats. The noise level rose to that particular register of 12 people talking in 4 separate conversations simultaneously, silverware clinking, a child asking for something twice, Todd laughing too loud at his own joke. Diane began serving. She started at Martin's end. The turkey, carved by Martin himself at the table, served by Diane with the efficiency of someone who had choreographed this exact sequence in advance. Martin first, then Todd, then Todd's wife, then the cousins, then Earl, then Beverly, then the aunt and uncle, then Ellen, then the teenage boy beside me. Then she stopped, went back to the kitchen, returned with the gravy boat, set it down at the center of the table. Went back to the kitchen again. I sat with an empty plate in front of me and watched the table eat. Not for long, 2, maybe 3 minutes, but long enough for everyone to notice. Or rather, long enough for the people who were paying attention to notice, and for the people who weren't to keep not paying attention, which was its own kind of verdict. Derek noticed. I saw him see it. He opened his mouth and Diane reappeared with my plate, turkey, sides, the works, and set it in front of me with a smile that was perfectly calibrated to look like nothing had happened. "Sorry, Mindy. Wanted to make sure yours was hot." It was not hot. It was the same temperature as everyone else's, which meant it had been sitting in the kitchen while the rest of the table was served. "Thank you," I said. "Because what else do you say?" "Because making a scene at a Thanksgiving table is not a victory, it's a detonation. And everyone in the radius gets burned, including the people who didn't deserve it." But then Martin looked at my plate, then at Diane, then at me, and said nothing. And that nothing was its own kind of sentence. Across the table, Earl Hutchins was cutting his turkey with the methodical patience of a man who had learned to observe before he spoke. He wasn't looking at me directly. But I had spent enough time in rooms where people's attention had a physical quality to know that his was on me. I picked up my fork. The phone in my pocket was still silent. Todd made a joke about the rolls being better than last year, and Diane laughed, and the moment dissolved into the general noise of the table. I ate. I was good at eating in silence. I had done it in worse places than this, at tables with higher stakes, surrounded by people with worse intentions. The Cole dining room, for all its accumulated weight, was still just a dining room. The cardigan was still just a cardigan. And I was still underneath the wool and the quiet and the 11 years of filed-away patience. Exactly who I had always been. Nobody at that table knew it yet. The meal settled into its second phase, the one where the food has been eaten and the wine has been refilled, and people start saying things they've been holding since the last time they were all in the same room. This is the dangerous phase. I've known it since the first Thanksgiving I spent with this family, when I was still new enough to be curious about them, before I understood the architecture of their dynamics. The first phase is performance. Everyone on their best behavior, the food a kind of social contract. The second phase is when the contract starts to show its fine print. Martin set down his fork and looked down the table at Derek. "How's the Henderson account?" Derek wiped his mouth. "Closing next week." "Signed the maintenance contract last Tuesday," Martin nodded. That was Martin's version of praise. A nod, a half-second of eye contact, and then he moved on. "Todd, the equipment lease. Where are we on that?" Todd launched into it. The table had a center of gravity, and it was Martin Cole, and every conversation eventually orbited back to him and the business and the progress of the quarter. I had watched this pattern for 11 years. The women talked to each other, the men talked to Martin. Derek navigated both, but when Martin was asking questions, Derek belonged to the table's center, and I sat at its edge. I ate my sweet potato casserole and listened and did not mind. I had sat in briefings with generals who operated exactly the same way. The center of gravity shifts. You learned to work from the perimeter. Deanne refilled the wine at her end of the table and then walked the bottle down toward ours. She paused at Ellen's glass, then her husband's, then looked at me. "Mindy, you probably shouldn't, right? Driving tonight?" I had had half a glass. Derek was driving us home. Diane knew this. "I'm fine," I said. "Thank you." She poured a careful half glass and moved on. Ellen caught my eye from across the table. Ellen was Derek's cousin, mid-40s, accountant, the kind of person who notices things and files them away without comment. She gave me a look that lasted exactly as long as it needed to and then returned to her food. The teenage boy beside me, whose name was Jake, had both earbuds in now. I didn't blame him. Todd's wife, Karen, leaned across the table toward me. Karen was one of the genuinely warm people in this family. She had been kind to me since the beginning, in the uncomplicated way of someone who simply didn't see the point of the other thing. "Mindy, how's work been? Busy?" "Always," I said. "State stuff, right?" This from Todd, not unkindly, the way you repeat a thing you've heard enough times that it's become the whole sentence. "Legal work? Yes. Must be nice," Todd said. "Those government hours?" He grinned. He meant nothing by it. That was almost worse. "It has its rhythms," I said. Diane had returned to her seat. She picked up her wine with the careful timing of someone who had been waiting for a gap. "Mindy, I keep meaning to ask. You've been doing this for what, 15 years now? Same office?" "Different roles," I said. "Same general mission, and there's is there growth in that? Room to move up?" She asked it with the tone of genuine curiosity, which was the most sophisticated version of the thing she did. It didn't sound like an attack. It sounded like concern. "I just wonder sometimes if you've thought about the private sector. Derek has such good connections. He could probably make some calls." Derek, from the middle of the table, had gone still in the way he went still when he was deciding whether to step in or let it pass. I answered before he could calculate. "I'm exactly where I want to be," I said. "Of course," Diane said. "I just meant for the financial side of things." "You know, I do know," I said. "Thank you, Diane." The conversation moved on. They always moved on. That was the genius of it. Or maybe not genius, maybe just habit. The comment lands. It sits for a moment in the air, and then someone mentions something about the football game or asks about dessert, and the moment dissolves before you can hold it up to the light. But Earl Hutchins had not looked away. I noticed it the way you notice a shift in wind direction before you can explain why. He wasn't staring. It was subtler than that. He was the kind of man who had learned to absorb information without broadcasting that he was doing it. 2 tours in Vietnam, 40 years of whatever came after. He had the stillness of someone who had been in enough situations where attention was a survival skill. He was watching me the way you watch something that doesn't quite fit the frame you've been given. I met his eyes for a moment. He looked back at his plate. Beverly leaned over and said something quiet to him, and he nodded once. Martin pushed back slightly from the table and began the ritual of the second helping. The standing, the deliberate assessment of what remained, the commentary on the turkey. Todd joined him. The table fragmented into smaller conversations. Diane stood to clear plates. She collected from Martin's end first. Of course, working her way down with the efficiency of someone who understood that the order of things was itself a communication. Patricia rose to help. Karen rose to help. I rose to help. "Oh, Mindy, you don't have to," Diane said. Not stopping, not looking up. "I want to," I said. Same words I had said to Patricia that morning. I picked up 3 plates and carried them to the kitchen. In the kitchen, Patricia was running water. Diane was stacking. I set the plates on the counter and turned to go back for more, and Diane said, still not looking at me, voice just below the noise of the table, "I just think Derek deserves a partner who challenges him." That's all I meant. I stopped. She kept stacking. I stood there for 3 seconds. I counted. The way I'd learned to count in situations where your first instinct is the wrong one. And then I picked up the empty casserole dish and walked back to the table. Derek was laughing at something Todd had said. His laugh was real. He had a good laugh, Derek, one of the first things I had loved about him. I sat back down, the phone in my pocket moved. Not a ring. Not yet. A single buzz. A text. I pressed my hand against my pocket from the outside and felt it. The area code was the governor's office. I kept my hand still, read the notification through the fabric of my cardigan as if I could. 2 minutes, I thought. You have 2 minutes before the next thing, except this time I was wrong about the 2 minutes. The text read, "Call when able. Legal hold on deployment auth. Governor wants to talk directly. Reeves." Reeves was my deputy, Captain Sandra Reeves. 29 years old and the most meticulous legal mind I had worked with in 20 years of JAG. She did not text "Governor wants to talk directly" unless the governor actually wanted to talk directly. She was not given to drama. If anything, she undersold things. If Reeves said it was urgent, it was urgent. I read the message twice, put my phone back in my pocket, and looked at the table. Dessert was being arranged. Patricia had brought out 2 pies, pumpkin and pecan, and Diane was slicing with the same precise efficiency she brought to everything. The table had loosened, the way tables do after the main meal, people leaning back, ties loosened, the kids drifting toward the living room. Derek was talking to his father about something involving a contract dispute with a supplier. Martin was listening with his arms crossed, which meant he was engaged. This was a good moment for Derek. I didn't want to pull him out of it. I made a decision. I would step outside, call the governor, handle whatever needed handling, and be back before the pie was fully distributed. Clean. Contained. Nobody needed to know. I pushed back my chair quietly. "Excuse me," I said, to nobody in particular. Jake had both earbuds in. Ellen was talking to Karen. Diane was slicing pie. Earl looked up. I gave him a small nod, the reflexive acknowledgement of one person catching another's eye, and walked toward the back hallway that led to the side door. I had my phone out before I reached the door. The side yard was a strip of brown November grass between the house and the detached garage, with a rust basketball hoop Derek and his brother had grown up with. I stood on the concrete pad outside the door and pulled up the governor's direct line from my contacts. He picked up on the second ring, Mindy. Governor Richard Hale had the voice of a man who had been in rooms where things were decided for long enough that decisiveness had become his resting state. We had worked together for 3 years. He did not use pleasantries when things were moving, Governor. "I have the text from Reeves. What's the situation?" "The indemnification language in Section 4 of the deployment authorization. Your office flagged it last night. The AG's office is now saying it creates a gap in liability coverage for the Guard units during the relief operations." If a soldier gets hurt on a civilian property during flood clearance and the homeowner makes a claim, we may have nothing to stand on. I saw the flag. I had drafted an amendment last Wednesday. It's in the system under Cole Amendment 7. The AG's office says they haven't received it. Then there's a routing failure on their end. I can have Reeves send it directly within the hour. I need this resolved before the units redeploy on Monday, Mindy. I need your personal sign-off on the amendment language, and I need confirmation from the AG by end of day tomorrow. You'll have it. I'll call Reeves from here and have her push the document directly to the AG's chief counsel. I'll follow up personally tonight. A pause. You're at Thanksgiving. I am. I'm sorry to pull you. It's what the job is, sir. Another pause, shorter. You know, I've been meaning to say, the work you did on the Western Counties briefing last month, the legal framework you put together for the emergency declaration. That was the cleanest piece of work my office has seen in years. I told the Adjutant General the same thing. Thank you, sir. Enjoy the rest of your holiday, Mindy. And thank you. The line went quiet. I stood on the concrete pad for a moment with the phone in my hand, looking at the basketball hoop. The net was long gone, just the rusted orange rim against a gray November sky. I called Reeves, gave her the instructions. She had the document sent to the AG's chief counsel before I finished the sentence. That was Reeves. I put the phone back in my pocket and turned toward the door. Deanne was standing in the doorway. She had a dish towel in one hand and an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not the calibrated pleasantry, not the efficient dismissal. Something more unguarded than that. She had been there long enough to hear at least the last portion of the call. I could tell by the specific quality of her stillness. Pie's ready, she said. Her voice was 2 degrees off its usual register. Thank you, I said. I walked past her into the hallway. The dining room was louder than when I'd left. Todd had turned up the football game volume, and someone was objecting. I found my chair and sat down. Earl was watching me from across the table with an expression that had changed since I'd left the room. Not curiosity anymore, recognition. He leaned forward slightly. That was the governor, he said. Not loudly. Pitched for me and the immediate vicinity. Derek, 2 seats away, turned. It was, I said. Earl nodded slowly. He set down his fork. Richard Hale. Yes, you're JAG, he said. It wasn't a question. It came out quiet and certain. The way things come out when a man has finally placed something that has been sitting at the edge of his memory. You were at the Fort Gordon VFW event because you were the keynote. I was in the back. I came in late, missed the introduction. He paused. Lieutenant Colonel Cole. The table went quiet in the particular way that requires a trigger. One person stops talking, then the next, until the silence has propagated to every corner. Martin Cole looked up from his pie. Deanne, who had followed me back in and was standing at the kitchen doorway with the dish towel still in her hand, went completely still. Derek was looking at me with an expression I can only describe as someone finally watching 2 separate rooms of their life open a door between them. Mindy, Patricia said softly from her seat at the corner of the table. Just my name. Nothing else. I looked at Earl. He was sitting straight now, the particular straightness of a soldier who has found his bearing again in a room full of civilians. He was 72 years old, and in that moment he carried every year of it like a credential. I didn't recognize you without the uniform, he said. I should have. Most people don't, I said. That's usually fine. He shook his head once, slowly. Not today. He looked around the table, at Martin, at Diane, at Todd, at all of them, with the quiet authority of a man who has earned the right to say what comes next. And then he said it. Earl didn't speak immediately. That was the thing about men like Earl Hutchins. They had learned somewhere in the long education of hard years that silence before a sentence gives the sentence weight. He picked up his water glass, took a slow drink, set it back down exactly where it had been. The table waited. Even Todd, who had been angled toward the football game 30 seconds ago, was fully present now. I want to tell you all something, Earl said, about what a JAG officer actually is, because I don't think everybody here knows. Martin Cole said nothing. His arms were no longer crossed. They were flat on the table, which for Martin was the closest thing to open I had ever seen. Earl looked at his plate for a moment, then back up. In 1969, outside of Hugh, we had a situation. I won't go into all of it. But there was a question about an order. Whether it was legal, whether it crossed a line. We had boys who didn't know what to do. Follow it and maybe do something they couldn't come back from. Refuse it and face court-martial. He paused. The JAG officer attached to our unit was a woman, Captain, 26 years old. She came out to where we were, in the field, in the middle of the night, and she sat down in the dirt with us, and she walked us through it. Every angle. What the law said, what our rights were, what the consequences were either way. He looked at me. She didn't have to be there. Nobody ordered her out to us. She came because she understood that the law isn't just paperwork. It's the thing that stands between a soldier and the worst version of what war asks him to be. The room was very quiet. She saved 4 of us from making a decision we couldn't have lived with, Earl said. And I have never forgotten what that felt like. To have someone show up with the law as a shield instead of a weapon. He looked at me steadily. That's what JAG is, he said. That's what this woman has been doing. I looked down at my plate. I had heard versions of this before. The formal acknowledgments, the after-action summaries, the letters that went into files. I had never heard it said at a Thanksgiving table in front of my in-laws, and I was not prepared for what it did to me. There was a tightness across my chest that I recognized as the specific effort of not letting your face do what it wants to do. Derek's hand found mine under the table. I let him hold it. Earl sat back. Now, if you don't mind, Lieutenant Colonel. He used a title with the natural ease of someone for whom military courtesy was not formality but respect. I'd like to hear about your deployment. If you're willing, around the table, nobody moved. Diane had set the dish towel down on the counter behind her. Patricia had both hands around her coffee cup. Martin Cole was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face directed at me before, attentive, recalibrated, uncertain in the way that only happens when a certainty you've held for a long time turns out to have been wrong. Derek squeezed my hand once and let go. I took a breath. Iraq, I said. 2004. I was a captain then, 30 years old. I had not talked about this at a dinner table in years. I had talked about it in depositions, in congressional testimony delivered via written statement, in the quiet of Derek's car on a long drive home from a VFW event 3 years ago, when he'd finally asked and I'd finally answered. I had not talked about it here, in this house, with these people. But Earl had opened a door, and the room was still enough to walk through it. We were outside Fallujah, forward operating base, about 40 kilometers from the city. My job was advising the battalion commander on rules of engagement, investigating incidents, making sure the legal framework held even when everything else was coming apart. I paused. October 14th, 2004. There was an operation. I'm not going to use the full details. Some of it is still classified. Some of it just doesn't need to be said at a dinner table. But there was a decision made about the rules of engagement for that operation. A decision that I had formally advised against. In writing, filed through proper channels 3 days before the operation went forward, Earl was watching me with the stillness of a man who had been in enough operations to know what comes next. The operation proceeded anyway, I said. And 3 men from that battalion did not come home. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Not the silence of social uncertainty, the silence of people confronting something real. Their names were Sergeant First Class David Okafor, Specialist Marcus Webb, and Private First Class Tyrell James. I said each name clearly. I had said them thousands of times in my own mind. It felt different to say them out loud here, to people who had never heard them, in a room that had no previous relationship with their weight. Okafor was 34. Webb was 22. James had turned 19 2 weeks before. Patricia made a small sound that she covered with her hand. My written objection was filed, and then buried in the administrative aftermath. There was an investigation. The findings did not reflect the sequence of events accurately. I knew that. There were others who knew that. I looked at my water glass. I was advised informally that pursuing it further would not be productive for my career. But you pursued it, Earl said. I preserved the documentation, I said. I kept copies in places where they couldn't be misplaced. And I waited 8 years, Derek said quietly. He had heard this part before. 8 years, I said. In 2012, a congressional subcommittee reopened a series of incidents from that period. My documentation resurfaced. The original findings were vacated. Okafor, Webb, and James were posthumously cleared of any implication of wrongdoing that the initial report had hinted at. Were you cleared? Earl asked. My objection was entered into the official record, I said. That was enough. Earl looked at me for a long moment. Was it enough? It was a real question. He wasn't testing me, he genuinely wanted to know. I thought about it the way I always thought about it. Not with the calculation of someone managing an answer, but with this honesty of someone who had asked themselves the same thing in the dark more times than they could count. Some days, I said. Most days, yes. The record is correct. That's what matters. The 3 men are on the right side of history now. Their families know what actually happened. I paused. There are still mornings when I wake up at 4 a.m. and I go through the sequence again. Every decision, every filing, every day I waited, looking for the moment I could have moved faster. Done more, and do you find it? Earl asked. That moment? No, I said. I don't. He nodded once. Good, he said. That means you did the work right. From somewhere down the table, Jake, the teenager with the earbuds, had taken both of them out. He was sitting completely still, watching me with the wide-open attention of someone who had just discovered that the world is larger than he had previously understood. I noticed that. I don't know why, but I noticed it. The football game was still on in the other room, volume low now, commentators narrating a world that felt very far away from this table. Diane had not moved from the kitchen doorway. Her dish towel was still on the counter. Her hands were at her sides. The table began to breathe again slowly, the way rooms do after something heavy has been set down in the middle of them. Todd refilled his wine. Karen asked Earl a question about Vietnam that opened a side conversation. Patricia got up to check the coffee. Martin Cole remained exactly where he was, arms flat on the table, looking at the space in front of him with the expression of a man reorganizing something internal that he was not yet ready to discuss out loud. Derek leaned over to me. You okay? Yes, I said, and I was. There was a specific kind of tiredness that came after telling that story. Not depletion, more like the feeling after you've been carrying something at an awkward angle for a long time and finally shifted the grip. The weight didn't change. The carrying of it became more honest. I excused myself to use the restroom. Not because I needed to, but because I needed 2 minutes of a room that wasn't watching me recalibrate. The hallway bathroom was at the end of the corridor past the family photos. I had walked past those photos hundreds of times. Derek at various ages, Diane's high school graduation, Martin and Patricia's wedding portrait, a framed picture of the original Cole landscaping truck, 1978, Martin standing beside it with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who has decided something irrevocable. I knew these photos the way you know the wallpaper of a place you've spent a long time in without quite belonging to. I washed my hands, looked at my face in the mirror. The cardigan was still gray, the hair still pulled back, the face still. The face I'd been navigating the world with for 48 years. Nothing had changed in the mirror. Everything had changed in the dining room. I was drying my hands when I heard footsteps in the hallway. The door was not fully closed. I had not latched it. Old habit, the residual vigilance of shared spaces. You don't fully close a door unless you need privacy. The footsteps slowed outside it. A pause, then Diane's voice, low, intended for someone close to her. I didn't know, and Derek's voice, tighter than usual. I know you didn't. Why didn't she ever say anything? A silence. Because she shouldn't have had to, Diane. Another silence, longer. The governor, Diane said. Her voice had lost its architecture. The efficiency, the calibration, it was gone. What was underneath was something younger and less certain. She talks to the governor, she advises the governor, Derek said, on legal matters involving the National Guard. She has for 3 years, and before that she was doing the same thing at the federal level. And before that she was in Iraq. A pause. She has a drawer at home. She doesn't open it often. It has letters in it from the families of soldiers she helped. I've read some of them. His voice did something on the last sentence that I had only heard it do a handful of times in 11 years. You don't read those letters and think about whether her career has an upside, Diane. I stood very still in the bathroom. I had not known Derek had read all of those letters. He had mentioned it once obliquely, a year ago. I had not asked him to say more. I understood now that he had been carrying that quietly, in the same way I carried other things. Not as a burden, but as something you hold carefully because it matters. The footsteps moved away down the hall. I waited 30 seconds. Then I opened the door and walked back toward the dining room. I was passing the last family photo, the one of Diane and Derek as children, maybe 8 and 10 years old, standing in the backyard of what must have been a previous house, squinting into the sun. When I heard a different sound from the living room, Martin Cole's voice, he was not talking to anyone in the room. He was on the phone, standing near the window, back to the doorway, voice low but not low enough. Earl told me she was at Fort Gordon VFW last spring. The keynote, a pause. No, I didn't know. Nobody told me. Another pause, longer. I've been in the same room with her for 11 years, Bill. I did not stop walking. I went back to the dining room and sat down. Ellen was there, and Karen and Jake, who had fully abandoned his phone now, and was sitting in the particular way of teenagers who have accidentally become interested in something. Beverly Hutchins was telling Patricia about her granddaughter, the ordinary machinery of a family afternoon running alongside everything else. It was Jake who spoke to me first. Can I ask you something? He was maybe 16, Derek's cousin's son, the boy I had written off as peripheral at the start of the meal. Sure, I said. The 3 guys you mentioned, Okafor and the others. He stopped. Reconsidered. Do their families know? Like, that you were the one who kept the documentation? It was a precise question. Better than most adults would have asked. Some of them, I said. Okafor's mother wrote me a letter after the subcommittee findings were released. Webb's sister called my office. I never heard from James's family, but I've looked them up. They're in Louisiana. He had a younger brother who would be about your age now, maybe a couple years older. Jake absorbed this. Do you think about them? The families? Yes, I said. Regularly, he nodded slowly, with the gravity of someone filing something important. That's good, he said. I think that's good. I thought of Earl saying the same thing to me 20 minutes ago, in different words, about a different kind of accountability. That means you did the work right. There was a thread running through it. The idea that the weight never going away was not a flaw in how you were carrying it. It was proof that you understood what it weighed. Deanne came back into the dining room. She sat down in her chair, not efficiently, not with the forward momentum of someone managing the room. She sat down the way you sit when your legs have decided before your mind has. She picked up her wine glass and held it without drinking from it. On the counter behind her, at the edge of my peripheral vision, was my coat, and sticking out of the inside pocket of my coat, where I had tucked it before leaving the house this morning, half visible, corner only, was a photograph. I had forgotten it was there. I had put it in this coat 6 weeks ago, coming back from a ceremony at the armory. A framed photo from the occasion, too large for a purse, tucked into the inside pocket with the intention of transferring it to the car. I had forgotten. The photo showed me in full dress uniform, Army service uniform. Lieutenant Colonel's silver oak leaf on the shoulder, service ribbons on the chest, standing between the Adjutant General of the state and Governor Richard Hale. All 3 of us facing the camera at the conclusion of a formal briefing on the National Guard deployment. Deanne was looking at the coat, at the corner of the photograph visible above the pocket. She set her wineglass down very carefully. Then she looked at me. She didn't say anything right away. That was new. In 11 years of Thanksgiving tables and Christmas dinners and Sunday afternoons in this house, Diane Cole had never been at a loss for the next sentence. She always had the next sentence. It was her primary defensive structure. Keep the conversation moving, keep the definitions in place, keep the room organized according to the version of things she had decided on. Silence was not a tool she used. She was using it now, involuntarily. I watched her look at the photograph and then look at me, and then look back at the photograph the way you look at something that is rewriting a document you thought was finished. Karen had noticed. Ellen had noticed. Jake had noticed because Jake was noticing everything now. I stood up, walked to my coat, and removed the photograph from the pocket. Not to show it, just because it felt wrong to leave it there like a trap. I set it face down on the counter, folded my coat over the back of the chair, and sat back down. Diane said, "That's you." "Yes," I said, "in uniform, yes." She looked at her hands. "With the governor." "We were at a deployment briefing at the armory." 6 weeks ago." A long pause. "Can I see it?" she asked. It was the first time in 11 years that Diane Cole had asked me for anything with that particular register in her voice. Not the efficiency of a request, not the social choreography of a favor. An actual ask, from an actual place of wanting to understand. I reached over and turned the photograph face up on the counter and slid it toward her. She looked at it for a long time. Martin had come back from the living room. He stood in the doorway for a moment, assessed the room with the practiced eye of a man who had been reading rooms for 50 years of business, and then came in and sat down. He did not look at the photograph. He looked at me. "Derek tells me you went to West Point," he said. "No, sir," I said. "Georgetown Law. I was commissioned through Army ROTC." He nodded slowly, processing. "And you've been JAG since then?" "Since 1999, I said. 27 years. He looked at the table's surface for a moment. Martin Cole was not a man who apologized. I had understood that from the beginning, but he was, underneath the sorting mechanism and the business calculus, a man who had built something from nothing and therefore understood. Even if he had forgotten, he understood what it meant to do work that mattered. He looked up. "I didn't know," he said. 2 words, stripped of everything else. "I know," I said. "You never said." "No." He seemed to want to ask why but couldn't find the angle. I didn't help him find it. Not because I was withholding, because the answer was complicated in a way that required more than this moment, and some answers are better arrived at slowly. Todd had come back in from the living room. He stood near the doorway with his hands in his pockets, reading the room, and then quietly found his chair and sat down. Diane set the photograph back on the counter. She was still holding herself with the surface composure of a person managing something large beneath it, but the management was visible now in a way it had never been before. When the mechanism is working perfectly, you don't see the effort. When it's working against something it wasn't designed for, you see the strain. "I owe you an apology," she said. She said it to the table. Not to me specifically, not to the room. To the table, which was perhaps the most honest version of it she could manage right now. "You don't have to," Patricia began. "Mom?" Diane said it quietly, not sharply. "I do." She looked at me then. Direct, which cost her something. I could see it cost her. "I've been dismissive of you for a long time," she said. "I told myself it was just, that I was just being practical, realistic, that I was looking out for Derek." A pause. "But I was doing what I do, which is decide what things are worth before I've actually looked at them. And I decided what you were worth a long time ago. And I stopped looking. I sat with that. There was a version of this moment I had imagined. In the abstract way, you imagine things you don't actually expect to happen. The apology, the acknowledgement, the vindication. In that imagined version, I had felt something clean and complete, like a proof arriving at its final line. This was not that. This was messier. Diane's face was not comfortable. She was not relieved. She was in the specific discomfort of someone who has just seen themselves clearly, and is deciding what to do with the view. I did not feel vindicated. I felt tired and sad, and also, underneath that, something I had not expected. Protective, not of myself. Of her, because I had watched Diane Cole for 11 years and I understood that the sorting mechanism, the efficiency, the control, the constant management of the room was not cruelty. It was armor. People who have to control everything are usually people who are afraid of what happens when they can't. I had never known what Diane was afraid of. I thought I was beginning to understand. I hear you, I said. She waited. I'm not going to tell you it was fine, I said. It wasn't always fine. Some of it was hard in ways that I absorbed saying anything because I thought that was the better choice. I still think it was the better choice. I paused. But I also think we've been in the same family for 11 years and we don't actually know each other. Diane looked at me. I'd like to change that, I said. If you would. The room was very quiet. Patricia had both hands over her mouth. Not crying, controlling the impulse to cry, which was its own kind of discipline, Earl Hutchins, from his end of the table, was looking at his water glass with the expression of a man who has seen a great many things resolve and knows the difference between resolution and the beginning of one. Derek, beside me, was absolutely still. Then Martin Cole did something I had never seen him do at a dinner table in 11 years. He reached over and put his hand on Derek's shoulder. Not a business gesture, not the approval nod. Something older and quieter than that. And he said to son, not to the room, "You picked well." Derek's jaw moved once. I looked at the table. Outside, through the dining room window, the November sky had gone from gray to the specific pale gold of late afternoon, the light that comes just before dark settles in, the kind that makes everything it touches look considered and still. The football game commentator said something distant and unintelligible from the other room. Somewhere a chair shifted. The photograph was still on the counter, face up now. The three of us in uniform at the armory caught mid-sentence in a briefing about flood relief and legal frameworks and the unglamorous work of keeping the machinery of service running. Nobody said anything for a moment. Nobody needed to. The afternoon continued the way afternoons do after something seismic, not with fanfare, but with the quiet adjustment of people finding new footing on ground that has shifted. Patricia made fresh coffee. Todd turned the football game off without being asked. Karen helped clear the remaining dishes with the careful efficiency of someone who understands that useful hands are sometimes the best thing you can offer a room that needs to settle. Jake sat at the corner of the table with his phone face down and his attention fully present, which for a 16-year-old in November was its own kind of offering. Earl had been quiet since Martin's words to Derek. He was the kind of man who knew when a room needed to find its own level before anyone added weight to it. He drank his coffee and watched and waited with the patience of someone who had learned that the most important moments are rarely the loudest ones. It was Beverly who moved things forward. She reached across the table and touched Earl's hand. The lightest contact, the private language of 50 years of marriage, and Earl looked at her and then looked at the room and made a decision. He set down his coffee cup. "I want to say something," he said. "And I want to say it to everybody here, not just to Mindy." The room gathered itself. Martin, who had barely moved since his words to Derek, looked up. Diane, who had been quiet in a way that was new and undefended, turned toward him. Earl looked around the table slowly. He had the unhurried deliberateness of a man who had been in enough situations where the wrong word at the wrong moment cost lives. He did not waste words. When he spoke, you understood that each one had been considered. "Most of you in this room have never served," he said. "That's not a criticism. That's just the country we live in now. A small percentage carry that weight so the rest don't have to. I'm not saying that to make anyone feel guilty. I'm saying it because it means most people have no frame for what it actually costs." He paused. "When I came back from Vietnam, nobody asked. That was a different time. You didn't talk about it. People didn't want to hear it. You put it in a box, and you got on with things. I put mine in a box for 20 years before I opened it again. He glanced at Beverly. She helped me open it. That's a different story. A small pause. The point is, the cost doesn't disappear because nobody's looking at it. It just sits there in the box, doing what unexamined things do. Todd was leaning forward with his elbows on the table. Martin had not moved. JAG officers, Earl continued, are not what people think they are. People hear military lawyer and they think paperwork. They think courtrooms. They think the people who stay back while others go forward. He shook his head. That is not what they are. JAG officers deploy. They go to the forward positions. They sit in the dirt with the infantry, and they carry the law with them like a piece of equipment, because without it, what you have is not a military. It's just armed men doing whatever they decide. He looked at me. The work that Mindy described, the objection she filed, the documentation she preserved, the 8 years she waited for the record to be corrected, that is not bureaucratic work. That is the hardest kind of moral work there is. Doing the right thing when nobody's watching, with no guarantee that anyone will ever know. Patricia had stopped pretending to drink her coffee. Sergeant First Class David Okafor, Earl said. He said the name, the way soldiers say names, without preamble, without softening, with the full weight of the person behind it. Specialist Marcus Webb. Private First Class Tyrell James. The names in Earl's voice were different from the names in my voice. Not better or worse. Different in the way that the same truth sounds different depending on who has earned the right to say it. Earl had earned it by a different route than I had, but the route led to the same understanding, that the names of the dead are not punctuation. They are the whole sentence. Martin Cole closed his eyes briefly. Those 3 men came home wrong because a decision was made that one person in that chain of command said in writing should not be made. Earl's voice was even, unhurried, carrying the full authority of a man who had seen what bad decisions in combat looked like from the ground up. That person was Mindy. She was 30 years old. She was right. And she spent 8 years waiting for the institution to catch up to what she already knew. He paused. That kind of waiting is not passive. That is active, sustained moral courage. The kind that doesn't get a ceremony. Diane had her hands in her lap. She was looking at them. I've known a lot of people in my life, Earl said. Veterans and civilians both. The ones I respect most are not the ones who made the loudest noise about who they were. They're the ones who did the work and let it speak when it was ready. He looked around the table one more time. You have one of those people in your family. You have had her for 11 years. The room was completely silent. Outside the window, the pale gold light had deepened to the amber of late afternoon, the kind that makes shadows long and edges soft, the kind that belongs specifically to Thanksgiving in the American South, to houses where multiple generations have eaten at extended tables and said grace and navigated the complicated machinery of love and expectation. Martin Cole cleared his throat. He looked at me. I owe you more than an apology, he said. His voice had the roughness of a man not accustomed to vulnerability, navigating it anyway. But I don't have the right words yet. So I'm going to say, I hear you. And I'm going to do better. It was the most I had ever heard Martin Cole say about anything that was not a business matter or a piece of family logistics. It was enough. Derek's hand found mine again under the table. Earl picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, and looked at Patricia with the mild expression of a man who has said what he came to say and is ready for the ordinary comfort of things. Patricia stood up. I'll get the pot, she said. And just like that, with coffee and the sound of chairs adjusting, and Karen asking Jake if he wanted pie after all, and Todd saying something quiet to his wife, the room became a room again. Not the room it had been at 1 o'clock when Diane set my plate down last. A different room. One that would take time to understand fully, that none of us would navigate perfectly, that would require more conversations and more honesty and more of the slow, uncomfortable work of revision. But a different room. That was enough for one Thursday in November. 3 months is not a long time. It's long enough for the holidays to come and go. Christmas at Derek's brother Todd's house that year, smaller and quieter than usual, with a seating arrangement nobody commented on, but everyone noticed had changed. New Year's at home, just Derek and me, takeout and a fire, and the specific piece of a couple who have stopped pretending about certain things. Long enough for the flood relief deployment to close out legally, the amended authorization language filed and accepted, the guard unit stood down and home for the winter. Long enough for some things to begin, and for others to settle into the ground where they belong. Diane called on a Tuesday in February. I was at my desk at the office, reading through a contract indemnification review that Reeves had flagged, and my personal cell lit up with Diane's name. We had not spoken directly since Thanksgiving. There had been a Christmas card, a real one, handwritten 3 sentences in Diane's precise script. I've been thinking about what Earl said, and what you said. I'm still thinking. I had kept it. I had not sent one in return, because I didn't know yet what I wanted to say, and I had learned a long time ago that the things you say before you're ready tend to cost more than the silence. I answered Mindy. Her voice was different from the phone than from across a dinner table. Smaller, somehow. Less produced. Diane, a pause. I've been trying to figure out how to do this for 3 months, she said. I kept starting and stopping. Derek told me you'd probably just pick up, that you don't hold things in a particular way. I didn't believe him. He knows me, I said. He does. Another pause. I'm sorry. I want to say it directly and not bury it in qualifications. I was dismissive and condescending, and I made you feel like a peripheral person in a family you married into in good faith. I did that over a long time, and I told myself stories about why it was reasonable, and none of those stories were true. She stopped. I'm sorry, Mindy. I sat back in my chair. Outside my office window, a February sky the color of old pewter bare trees along the parking lot, a flag moving in a slow wind, the ordinary view of an ordinary Tuesday. Thank you, I said. I mean that. I don't expect it to be fixed, she said. I know that's not how it works. No, I said. But it's a start, and starts matter, she exhaled. It sounded like something releasing. Derek said the same thing. Derek is occasionally right, I said. She laughed. It was the first time I had ever heard Diane Cole laugh at something I said. Not the polite acknowledgement of a table joke, but an actual laugh, short and surprised and real. It sounded like the laugh of someone 10 years younger than the woman I had watched, run Thanksgiving for 11 years. We talked for 22 minutes. Not about Thanksgiving specifically, not about the photograph or the governor or Earl's words. We talked about Derek a little, about the landscaping business, and a decision she was wrestling with about a regional expansion, about my work on a new piece of legislation affecting guard deployments that I was helping to draft. She asked questions, actual questions, not the rhetorical kind designed to establish a hierarchy. I answered them. She listened. When we hung up, I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand and thought about the 11 years behind us and what it costs to let something calcify and what it costs to break it open and which cost is higher. I didn't have a clean answer. I'm not sure there is one. I called Derek, she called. I said when he picked up. I know, he said. She texted me after. She said it went okay. It went okay. A pause. Are you okay? Yes, I said. And I was. Not in the uncomplicated way of someone for whom everything is resolved, but in the more durable way of someone who has set something down that she has been carrying at an awkward angle for too long. Martin Cole came to my office. This I did not expect. It was a Thursday 5 weeks after Diane's call. My assistant told me a Martin Cole was in the lobby asking if I had a few minutes. I told her to send him up. He came in with his coat still on and a small package under his arm. Brown paper, careful tape, the wrapping of a man who does not wrap things often. He stood in the middle of my office and looked around at the walls. The framed commission, the photograph from the armory, the small shadow box Derek had given me 3 years ago with the ribbons and the oak leaf. And he took it all in with the methodical attention of a man recalibrating a long-held assessment. Then he set the package on my desk. Patricia and I found this, he said. when we were going through some boxes from the attic after Thanksgiving. Looking for Christmas things, I unwrapped it. It was a photograph, black and white, mounted on cardboard backing, the formal portrait style of the early 1970s. A young woman in an army uniform, captain's bars on the collar, looking directly at the camera with the expression of someone who had decided something irrevocable. My sister, Martin said, Eleanor, she died in 1974. Car accident stateside, 8 months after she came home from her second tour. He paused. She was JAG. I put her things in boxes, and I didn't take them out again for 50 years. I held the photograph carefully. Eleanor Cole had Martin's eyes. The same steadiness, the same quality of having decided something and being finished with the deciding. Patricia thinks Eleanor would have liked you, Martin said. His voice was doing the rough thing again, the thing it had done at the Thanksgiving table. I think so too. Now, he did not stay long. He was not built for long emotional conversations, and we both understood that. He shook my hand, formally, the way he would shake a colleague's hand, and he left. I set Eleanor's photograph on my desk, beside the shadow box, where it has stayed. That evening, Derek came home to find me making dinner. Eleanor's photograph visible through the kitchen doorway, and he stopped in the hallway and looked at it for a long time without asking. Then he came into the kitchen and stood beside me at the stove and put his arm around my shoulders as we stood there together while the rice cooked, not saying anything, which was its own kind of language. Outside, February was doing what February does in the South. Cold enough to mean it, not cold enough to commit. The kind of weather that can't decide what it is yet. Some things are like that. They take a full season to know themselves. A year is a strange unit of measurement. It sounds definitive. A year, a full rotation, a complete circuit back to the same Thursday in November with the same bare trees and the same cinnamon candles and the same Cole family house at the end of the same brick driveway. But the house you pull up to after a year like that one is not the same house. The address is the same. The colonial architecture is the same. The rusted basketball hoop is still in the side yard, still missing its net. But the interior has been rearranged in ways that don't show from the outside. Derek and I didn't go to the Cole house that second Thanksgiving. This was a mutual decision, made quietly in October, without drama. The family was gathering at Todd's house. Todd and Karen had offered, and the offer had been accepted with the relief of people who understood that sometimes a ritual needs a different room to become itself again. Derek and I said we'd come for dessert. We meant it. We went. But first in the morning, we cooked just the two of us in our kitchen with no seating chart and no folding tables and no choreography of who got served in which order. Derek made the turkey, a small one, 12 pounds, more than enough for 2 people and the leftovers we'd eat for 4 days. I made the sweet potato casserole, the same one I had brought to the Cole house in the ceramic dish a year ago. We had coffee and the radio on low and the specific, unhurried quality of a morning that belongs entirely to the people in it. At some point, Derek said, "Do you remember the first Thanksgiving after we got married?" Todd spilled gravy on the tablecloth and Diane acted like someone had been shot, I said. He laughed. The good laugh, the real one. She had that tablecloth dry cleaned 3 times, I know. She told me each time. We ate at the kitchen table, the two of us, with Eleanor's photograph on the counter, where I had moved it that morning. It lived on my office desk during the week, but came home on weekends, which had become a quiet habit neither of us had formalized or questioned. Martin's sister, looking out at the kitchen with her captain's bars and her decided expression. I thought about what it means to be known in the right order. Eleanor Cole had been in this family her entire life, and they had put her in a box for 50 years. I had been in this family for 11 years, and they had filed me under a label for most of them. The women in the Cole family who wore uniforms had a particular history of being underestimated by the people who loved them, which was its own kind of grief, the specific grief of being unseen by the ones who should have been paying attention. I hoped Eleanor had been known somewhere. by colleagues, by the soldiers she advised, by the people whose cases she carried. I believed she had been. The photograph suggested a woman who knew her own weight. After we ate, Derek poured more coffee, and we sat in the way we sit when neither of us has anywhere to be. Chairs slightly angled toward each other, the unhurried posture of people who have chosen the same room for long enough that the choosing has become a reflex. Earl asked about you, Derek said. He called last week. I forgot to mention it. What did he say? He said he wanted to make sure you were doing all right. After everything, Derek turned his coffee cup in his hands. I told him you were. You were right, I said. He also said. Derek paused, with the specific pause of someone deciding how to frame something. He said he'd figured out the call sign. Cold water. He said he'd asked around. I looked at the table. Cold water. It had been given to me in October of 2004, 3 weeks after the operation that did not go the way it should have, by a warrant officer named Terrence Bell, who was the kind of man who gave names to things as a way of holding on to them. He had watched me walk into the battalion commander's office with my written objection and walk out 40 minutes later with the same document, unfiled and unreceived, and he had found me afterward in the operations tent and said, very quietly, "You went in there cold. You made them cold. That's the only way anything stays clean out here. You're cold water." I had not asked for it. I had not rejected it. It had simply become the name the people around me used, and I had carried it the way you carry a name, not thinking about it most of the time, aware of it always. What did he figure out? I asked. He said it wasn't about temperature, Derek said. He said it was about clarity. Cold water clears things, makes you see what's actually there. A pause. He said the best JAG officers he'd ever encountered had that quality. You walk into a situation and instead of heating it up, which is what most people do when they're trying to assert authority, you bring the temperature down. You make it possible to see. I sat with that for a moment. I had never heard it described that way. Bell had never explained it. It had just been the name, and names are often more intuitive than their explanations. He's right, I said. That's what it is. Derek nodded, set down his cup. I should have asked you about it years ago. About all of it. I knew pieces. I told myself that was enough. He looked at me directly, the way he looked at me when he was not managing anything, when it was just the plain face of what he meant. It wasn't enough. I should have asked. You asked when you were ready, I said. That's not nothing. It's not everything either. No, I said. But marriages aren't a single conversation. There are a lot of small ones over a long time. We're still having ours. He reached across the table and took my hand, held it the way he had held it at the Thanksgiving table a year ago, when Earl was speaking and the room was rearranging itself. Outside, the November light was doing what it does, that particular gold of late morning, the kind that belongs to no other month, that carries in it the full knowledge of the dark coming and offers itself anyway, without apologies, for exactly as long as it lasts. I thought about David Okafor, Marcus Webb, Tyrell James. I think about them on most Thanksgivings. I think about what they would have become, the sons, fathers, old men they did not get to be. I carry them the way you carry the things that cannot be put down, which is not as a burden, but as a compass. A direction you keep checking to make sure you are still heading the right way. I think about Eleanor Cole on her counter, looking at our kitchen with her decided eyes. I think about Earl Hutchins sitting straight at a Thanksgiving table, saying names out loud that deserve to be said. I think about a 16-year-old boy putting his phone face down and paying attention. And I think about what cold water actually means. Not the temperature, not the toughness, but the clarity. The willingness to walk into a heated room and not add to the heat. To say the true thing in the true way and then wait, as long as it takes, for the truth to do what truth does when you give it enough room. Peace matters more than recognition. I believe that at 30. I believe it more at 48. But sometimes, not for vanity, not for vindication, just for the simple human need to be known. It helps when someone reads the file. If this story sat with you, If you've ever been the person in the room who knew their own worth and waited for the world to catch up, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And wherever you are, whatever Thursday finds you at, I hope the table you're sitting at knows exactly who you are.